The northwestern Indian state of Gujarat suffered the worst earthquake to hit India for many years.
Moving on in the bulletin, massive NDRF rescue operations are underway in Nepal as we speak.
Life has come to a standstill for many Delhiites amidst the flood.
People packing their bags and shutting their shops.
2023 marked one of the worst floods in Delhi's history.
Himachal Pradesh hit by landslides and cloudbursts.
The year 2025 tested nations with disasters internationally and nationally.
Every time a disaster breaks out in this country, we reach for our phones. We see the visuals, we share them. We feel something, fear, helplessness, or even awe at the scale of it. And then we see them, usually within hours, teams in orange, moving towards what everyone else is moving away from.
For most of us, that's where the story begins and ends. The rescue, the relief, the return to normalcy. But there's an entire architecture behind that moment. One that most people have never seen and few have thought to ask about.
This documentary is about that architecture. It's about an institution that was made in the aftermath of one of the worst natural disasters this country has ever seen and since become one of the best in the world. This is the story of the National Disaster Management Authority of India.
India is not an unlucky country. It is a geographically complex one, sitting at the convergence of tectonic plates, flanked by two unpredictable ocean bodies, home to the highest mountain range on Earth and some of the most flood-prone river plains. Disaster, in many ways, is written into our geography. For decades, our response to this reality was reactive. A disaster would strike, the army would be called, relief would be distributed, and slowly, painfully, life would resume. There was no system, no unified command, and no pre-positioned force waiting. The Indian Ocean tsunami of December 26th killed nearly 10,000 people on Indian shores alone. It exposed, in the most brutal way possible, the gap between what India had and what India needed. Within a year, the Disaster Management Act of 2005 was passed. NDMA was born.
To understand what NDMA is, how it works, and perhaps most importantly, how it communicates, we sat down with someone who has worked years in this system. Mr. Avdi has worked with NDMA across multiple capacities. He has trained responders, lectured on disaster communication at some of India's most prominent institutions.
He is not someone you will typically find on a primetime debate, but when the ground shakes, people like him are the reason the response doesn't.
We asked him everything about the institutions, about the warnings that worked, about those that didn't. We asked him about Kedarnath, about the impact it leaves when we show up in the times of disasters across countries. We asked him about what it is that still keeps him up at night. Here is how that conversation went. Can you please tell us about yourself and your journey with disaster management and your association with the NDMA?
Thank you, Manish. First up, I am an Indian Air Force veteran. I did 36 years with the Indian Air Force. I was a navigator. I did about 4,000 hours on a transport aircraft that sits in front of me, the Avro. And during my time with the Air Force, especially my flying days, I've done a lot of disaster-related sorties or missions, as we call them. And the turning point for me was when I got deputed to go to Maldives as part of Operation Castor, for tsunami relief at Maldives. And that set me thinking, because this was the aircraft that we took in there in 2005. That piqued my interest, and soon enough, when I got an opportunity, I took a 2-year sabbatical from the Indian Air Force and undertook my doctoral research on disaster management.
What were the circumstances that made it necessary for us to have a body like NDMA after 2005?
I will answer that question with a bit of history and background. If you look at our constitution, which has 3 lists: states, union and the concurrent list, disaster management doesn't figure as a subject in itself on either of these 3 lists. Obviously, our founding fathers at that time did not really envision that India would be so prone to disasters and would be among the top 3 or 5 countries which are vulnerable. Disaster management has always been a local governance body's mandate. In that sense, it's been the state governments which are supposed to undertake this, but recurringly what was found out in the decades of 90s and the 2000s, at the turn of the century, was that state governments were unable to cope up with the kind of intensity that the disasters now started having, or the frequency at which they were hitting the communities. At that point, it was still very response-centric, and the final nail, if I can use that term, was the tsunami of 2004-05. The devastation on the scale that it happened, and it was an international disaster. So many countries getting affected, Tamil Nadu and Kerala being case in point for us, and the amount of death and destruction of property that led to it was the immediate trigger. NDMA was born out of the DM Act of 2005, and it is the apex body headed by the Prime Minister, and it is supposed to give you a 360-degree look into the policies touching every aspect of disaster management, a holistic framework based on the guidance of Sendai and other institutional frameworks that exist globally. And NDMA has come a far way from its role as just a guideline issuing body to today, where it is a very seriously involved body in building capacities, getting mock drills across, coordinating with different states, disparate groups, and empowering communities to become more resilient. And the whole mission of NDMA being a disaster risk-free India, and something that NDMA has been doing it. And in terms of my association with NDMA, while I did a lot of research during my doctoral research, I visited it a couple of times and interacted with their office bearers. I am also the accredited SAR expert on their national roster. The Act created the National Disaster Response Force. We are the only country in the world to have a specialized response force. Rest all countries make do with police, forest, fire, the other kind of response forces. We are the ones which have standing 16 battalions almost. That's about 32,000 strong force of primarily dedicated for disaster response. And it also created district level, state level dealing mechanisms. And the Act in its 20 years journey has brought in a whole lot of institutional and legal mechanisms to deal with disaster risk and vulnerabilities. And as you are already aware, just last year it got amended, and a few areas which needed attention, like the urban disaster risk management, has been included now, and it is now mandatory for all states to form urban disaster management authorities and look at and have urban disaster management plans specific to their urban conglomerates.
राष्ट्रीय आपदा प्रबंधन प्राधिकरण ने विविध आपदाओं पर 33 दिशा निर्देश जारी किए हैं।
रिलीफ, रेस्क्यू, रिहेबिलिटेशन, उस पर जोर देने के साथ साथ ही रिफॉर्म पर भी बल दिया है।
Sir, in terms of the NDMA, can you please walk us through the standard disaster response timeline from the moment a threat is detected?
Most of these procedures are now institutionalized, or SOPs as we call them. So like I taught you guys in the class, there are specialist agencies for each disaster. Floods, the Central Water Commission is supposed to issue timely warnings. Cyclones, it is the responsibility of NDMA department. So these are all, if you see, are central agencies with presence in different states. Some states they might be in good strength, with great capacities, and in some states they may be having token presence with not so much of capacity. Having said that, where NDMA has come in and done remarkably well, it has networked all these capacities of warning, the early warning issuing agencies, and today we are able to predict exact to the minute the landfall of a cyclone, giving enough time for state governments and the central forces to evacuate people. I can stick my neck out and say that NDRF has been successful in evacuating more people than it has rescued post disasters. In the pre-disaster phase, it has been exceptionally effective in helping the state government evacuate. Case in point is Orissa, where during the super cyclone we lost close to 10,000 people, and since then the state has faced close to 4 to 5 cyclones of similar or more intensity, and the death toll is not even in double figures because of timely evacuation and early warning, and that is where it stands.
So since you talked about communication, it plays a vital role as far as a disaster is concerned. Can you please tell us about NDMA's public communication framework? How does it communicate with citizens before, during and after a disaster?
As I said before, there are specialized agencies like the Central Water Commission, the India Met Department, who are supposed to monitor and track a particular hazard and warn the state and central government people. Now, where NDMA comes in, it has now gotten SOPs where mobile-based, non-internet-based, CDMA-based alerts are being issued to the community. Of course, there's still a lot of work done in terms of last-mile connectivity. Especially the success story has been the alerts that goes to fishermen. Now, while the alerts may come, there are different levels. They're color-coded alerts, and what it entails now is, while the alerts might be there, how seriously the community receives it, how the distribution happens of those alerts in the community, within the community itself, and what actions the community takes based on those alerts. Some communities we have seen ignore it. It's more a question of livelihood than they still risk, and some communities are now coming around to taking these alerts seriously and not venturing out into the sea, and also doing the required evacuation. So it's a mix of government, NGOs, community, institutional and non-institutional frameworks that are at work here, and NDMA has done a great job in the last 2 decades to push this through.
In 2018, when Kerala drowned, the water was not the only thing that spread. On the same phones that carried the evacuation orders, traveled maps that led people the wrong way, routes that didn't exist, shelter addresses that were wrong. And in a flood, a wrong turn is not an inconvenience, it is a death sentence. This is the new battlefield of disaster management. Not the river, not the cyclone, the screen in your hand. NDMA can pre-position 16 battalions across this country overnight. It can evacuate 1 million people in 48 hours. But it cannot stop a message that has already been shared 400 times before anyone checks if it is true. The warning system took 20 years to build. The rumor took 20 seconds. And so the question that keeps disaster managers up at night is no longer just, did the warning reach in time? It is, when it did reach, did they believe it?
So when communication comes into play, so does misinformation. How does misinformation, especially on the social media, complicate disaster communication?
Every second there is an information out there which sets a narrative, and disasters are no exception to this framework that we face in our everyday lives. While social media can be regulated and harnessed to be effective alert givers, spreading of right information, and be very effective force multipliers in terms of our response and mitigation efforts. Misinformation, like I rightly pointed out, is an area of worry for us as practitioners of disaster management, because a lot of misinformation gets relayed like wildfire on the social media, especially with respect to the extent of damage. One area where we have found misinformation is rampant is artificial demand for essential goods. That while there might be enough stocks that the state governments have done in terms of basic grains and your oil and supplies, there could be rumors swirling around which say that there won't be any rice or there won't be any food in next 24 hours. So it leads to a lot of hoarding and it complicates the whole response. While social media can be regulated and harnessed to be effective alert givers, spreading of right information and be very effective force multipliers in terms of our response and mitigation efforts. Misinformation, like you rightly pointed out, is an area of worry for us as practitioners of disaster management.
I would like to talk about Kedarnath back in 2013 a bit. What does the entire episode reveal about our disaster communication failures and successes?
Well, back in 2013, our communication or the whole subject of disaster communication wasn't as evolved as we are lucky to speak about today. Uttarakhand 2013, as I call it, the Kedarnath floods, was a very epochal event in our country's history. Why? Because one, it was a hilly terrain, geographical wise, it's a challenge, and I'm sure you know this, that it entailed the largest helicopter rescue operation ever in the history of aviation or the world. Close to at one time 80 helicopters, Indian Air Force helicopters and HAL helicopters and private helicopters were present into service, and the aviation challenges in the hilly terrain, the way that response was undertaken was a phenomenal exercise in itself. And what was also a very key element of Uttarakhand floods, what we don't realize is that usually we look at communities which get affected. Here the community wasn't local. The locals were safe, most of them, and they have seen rains. You had close to 69,000 to 70,000 people from 10 to 12 different states of the country who are unaccustomed to or adapted to the hilly weather, and they were on that Char Dham Yatra for the pilgrimage, and they had envisioned a stay in the state of no more than 4 or 5 days or a week max, and get back to their own respective states. And they were a community who were not familiar with the geography, they were not familiar with the terrain, and they were definitely not familiar with the cold, wet conditions that the heavy rainfall happened. So in terms of disaster communication back then, perhaps the responsibilities for issuing alerts weren't as clearly defined as they are today, and that taught us the importance of disaster communication, that how rumor mongering, how law and order, how safety of women, children, elderly, even care of animals during disaster. These were the subjects that the Uttarakhand floods triggered, and NDMA has brought out guidelines for each of these specific aspects.
So sir, what changes have occurred in the NDMA after the Kedarnath episode? And I would also like you to bring in the recent amendments to the DM Act.
Well, that's a very important question. In our journey, the way we dealt with disasters since 2005 when the Act came. Back then in Uttarakhand, the early warning, the alert system was generic, and it was more at the institutional level. By this, what do I mean? That the specialized agency would issue warnings and alerts to a government agency. The community perhaps was not the intended target. From there to now, NDMA has really pushed this case where you have now alerts reaching communities, farmers, fishermen, local villagers, local people who visit markets in vulnerable place. These communities have been identified, and the last mile connectivity, that's something that has been improved upon compared to those times.
So India has increasingly become a first responder to disasters in neighboring and distant countries. Can you walk us through this evolution, and how does it impact our soft power?
That's an excellent question again, and a very relevant one given the fact that we are a rising economy and we are already the third or the fourth largest economy in the world, and whether we are an acknowledged regional power or not, we are a de facto regional power. South Asia and the Southeast Asia region looks up to us, and there are only two big players here, China and India, with the capability to respond for disasters in the neighborhood. If I can just run through a quick hazard mapping, Pakistan is perhaps very vulnerable to earthquakes because of the Hindu Kush mountain ranges being there, and Bangladesh is very prone to cyclones and flooding because of the nature of its location in the in the Bay of Bengal. And most of the island nations like Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, all these countries, our neighborhood Maldives, Sri Lanka, are all prone to tsunamis related hazards, and also for rainfall related hazards. Having said that, we do possess enough experience, the capability, the air power assets, and now that you have a dedicated force called the NDRF, we have the capacity and the capability to deliver a response in the neighborhood.
So as climate change is increasing the frequency and the severity of the disasters, is the NDMA keeping pace on an institutional level?
I would like to answer this question in a different way. NDMA is not a responder. NDMA is an apex body that gets policies, plans. It has pushed for National Disaster Management Plan. It is now bringing in district level plans, urban level plans. It's an apex body that is institutionalizing these mechanisms, assisting state governments in building their capacity. It is not a responder. NDMA does not move. It's like, if I can give an example of the United Nations. The United Nations does not have a standing army of its own. When it does peacekeeping forces, it seeks forces from its member countries who voluntarily, deploy their forces. So NDMA is in a similar position. It does not have responding forces like the police, the civil defense volunteers, or the home guards under its command and control. These are agencies which are available at center and at the state level, and there are various command and control mechanisms to take these in. But what NDMA does is it helps in coordinating.
So what do you consider the most significant challenge in India's disaster management system?
Oh, good you asked this question, because I just touched upon it. The biggest challenge is interagency coordination, and it's difficult because everyone is there. There is NDRF, there is local police, there is community volunteers, the army has been called in, there is the Air Force. There's multiplicity of actors there, and all of them are looking to, with one aim of saving lives and saving destruction of property, evacuation. The goals are noble, the aim is common. However, everyone comes with their own command control structure. It's been a fantastic journey for NDMA, from the marauding waves of the tsunami, which led to its birth. It has handled multiple disasters, learned from disasters, and each disaster response and recovery or the pre-disaster mitigation efforts, it is becoming the torchbearer for not just our country, also for the neighborhood, and it is trying to bring in all different stakeholders and get them all into one grid and achieve what we all want to achieve: save more Indian lives and avoid destruction of properties, and make India more disaster resilient. And towards that, it's been a torchbearer for a long time, and it can only get better from here.
This country sits on some of the most disaster-prone geography on earth. That is not a tragedy, it is simply the truth of where we live. For a long time, disaster in India meant waiting for help, waiting for someone to come. That waiting cost lives, and that cost was eventually counted. What was built in its place is not perfect, but it is real, it is growing, and on the worst days, it shows up. The most important disaster is the one that never became a headline, because someone, somewhere, had already prepared for it.
Institutions don't make themselves. They're made by people. People who decided after the worst thing imaginable that the next time should be different. NDMA is 20 years of that decision, made every single day by people you would never see on a news ticker. The ground will move again. Some place, some time, the floods would still come. But the NDMA, they'll be there. Thank you for watching.